welcome everyone. My name's Trisha Felice. I am so excited to be here tonight, to get to listen to Dave Evans, and for everyone here to get to participate in creating your new work life with Dave Evans. So we have a lot in store tonight. We're not going to waste too much time with housekeeping at the beginning because we have a packed night. So hopefully you've got coffee at hand if you're in one of these other time zones. I do want to thank our partners, the Grow Center for Church and Mission, for making no one have to pay to be here tonight, and also for our partners, the Center for Faith and Innovation at Wheaton College, for Together LA, the C.S. Lewis Institute, the Christian MBA Alumni Network, the Asia Leadership Network, Development Network, the Faith and Work Movement, and Resource Global. So as you see, we have a lot of partners tonight, and I think this is because of the great Dave Evans. This is it is the topic and the man. So we are in for a treat to hear from Dave. We're talking about designing your new work life tonight. Dave, we were just talking at the beginning of this, who is not a Dave Evans groupie? You know, as I was thinking, there's so many like quotes from Dave that right now I want to say just to make sure you all know these like genius like things that resonate in my mind, and I go and like Instagram tweet as soon as he says them, but I'm sure you will get tons of those in tonight too. So make sure you're taking notes. We are recording this, and those who are here will be able to get that recording. So in case you can't write as fast as Dave can talk, which might be a thing.
True, yeah.
But Dave, I'm going to let you give a little bit of your story. Dave has been digging into the faith and work aspect. He is a guru of faith and work. And I love hearing the part of your story when you kind of decided you were going to take your faith seriously. And we're looking at how much time we spend in the workplace. And I was looking up statistics. We can put in the chat, how much of your life, what percentage of your life do you think the average person spends at work? And hint is it's a lot. And if we spend so much of our life there and God loves us, then certainly God has something to say about our work. And it's exciting that tonight we're going to get to hear Dave dig into this and frameworks around how we can be purposeful in that aspect. So with that, Dave, we're ready for you.
Trisha, you know, I just hate introductions like that because, you know, when I teach I used to be a marketing guy, you know, when you're dealing with customer satisfaction, there's a very simple equation. Satisfaction equals performance minus expectations. You're not as happy as what you think you deserve to get or a little bit more. So, you know, and so organizers, you know, like Tommy and Trisha, love to make it look to the participants like all of you that they did a really good job and got a really cool guy like Dave's amazing. And the expectations are just going higher and higher. So my chance of clearing the bar is just dwindling to zero. I'm nowhere near as interesting as the fantastical person she just described, but there you go. Do the best we can. So yeah, I've been at this a long time. I turned 69 last Sunday. I'm old, I have 11 grandchildren. Been at this a long time, but way back in my 20s or late teens, you know, when I decided to go into the marketplace, not the full-time professional ministry, I thought I'd actually love Jesus enough and work for him for free, not work for him for money, like, you know, Tommy and Trisha do. And so, you know, what does that look like? And obviously, most of us spend most of our time out there in the world doing things. And if our lives are valuable, and the cross makes that really clear, and that most of your life is spent doing this work thing in the world, and that's pretty obvious, then clearly that work thing is really valuable. So I spent a lot of time in my late teens, early 20s asking, you know, lay people, you know, the elders and teachers in the church that I knew, you know, what their work meant to their faith, what their faith meant to their work. And it was a disastrous adventure. Long story short, nobody had the faintest idea what they were doing. They were living completely bifurcated lives. You know, I mean, the sacred and the secular were totally unrelated. They're just hoping they weren't doing the wrong thing most of the time during the day, which was pretty heartbreaking. And so, you know, that was way back in the early days, what we now call the faith and work movement, where we're trying to eradicate the sacred secular gap. and I've been teaching in that stuff for about 45 years. And that's a whole long story. We could do a whole theology on that. But out of that grew, it was really that long walk through understanding what ultimately is the Christian doctrine of vocational discernment. That's the essential platform we're standing on. That was the basis for what became Designing Your Life. Turns out not just people who've concluded that God is in charge of the universe, but even people haven't figured that out yet, still want their life to matter and still want their work to matter. I was on the first corporate culture committee at Apple Computer with Steve Jobs in 1979, before most of you were born. And I've been thinking about trying to create workplaces where people could be thriving, could be reflecting the glory of God, whether they would call it that or not. Turns out to be a big deal. And then after we wrote the first book, back in 2016, which did really well, the publisher came back and go, "Hey, Dave and Bill, it's not a book, it's a movement." Okay, that's a snazzy way of saying we want a sequel. And they actually asked us to write the book on work. We gave them 8 different books we could have written. And they said, no, we want the book about work because that's where people are really spending their time. And that's where they're dying, frankly. So that's the background of where we got here. And what I'm going to present to you is coming out of the second book. In fact, it's the second edition of the second book, which I'll explain a little bit. And that's a book for everybody. It's not an exclusively Christian book, but it is an intrinsically Christian book. And tonight, what I will do is what I call turning the Christian closed captioning on. So as I go along with material that I would present a little differently, but nonetheless the same stuff to anybody, including a room full of CEOs and chief HR officers in New York a couple of weeks ago. We'll talk about this also from God's point of view. And we're going to cover a lot of material, including doing an exercise that you're going to get to discuss with one another. And that's briefly how we got here. And I will try to remember to talk a little more slowly because not everybody here has English as a first language or thinks sounding like a chipmunk is fun. So when in doubt, use PowerPoint, which is my favorite thing to do. I have about 4 terabytes of PowerPoint and be glad to present for hours and hours and hours. So here we go. And so that was the flyer that Tommy put out. If this looks like the right seminar, you're in the right place. If it doesn't, you're in the wrong place. So where are we going to go? So, again, what happened? We wrote this book back in 2016. It did really well. It's now about 800,000 copies in 23 languages. And then they said, hey, design your work life. That came out February of 2020. Oh, dude, what happened after that? Well, this COVID thing happened is what happened. I mean, literally 2 weeks after we released that book, shelter in place started worldwide. And we got a lot of questions about designing your COVID life, designing your work life and your personal life in the shadow of this COVID thing. So we actually went back and rewrote 4 new chapters at the request of the publisher and re-released the book as Designing Your New Work Life in October of this year. Now, why did we write this book? Why did the publisher even say, hey, why don't you write a book about designing work better? Well, the reason being, the stats, Gallup has been tracking what they call engagement. How engaged are you at work? I mean, are you involved? Are you playing the game? Whether you're happy or not, or even just on the field, suited up and ready to go. And between 2/3 and 3/4 of U.S. workers, and this has been rising and falling a little bit, but pretty steady for about 22 years, have been disengaged. And that number globally is much worse. In lots of Japan, it's over 95% of workers are disengaged at the office. I mean, that is a massive squandering of the image of God. We've got people, who are supposed to be experiencing what it's like to co-participate in the glory of seeing the kingdom realized, and what they're mostly doing is getting crushed. So that's a problem. And now people are stuck, and people are stuck at work in a variety of ways. First of all, who's stuck? Well, frankly, everybody, whether it's the average employee, whether it's the boss, whether it's gig workers, which of course is a rapidly rising group. And then what are they stuck on? They're stuck on, first of all, this pandemic stress, which is a huge issue. A big issue is lack of meaning. I mean, does it really matter to me? Then frankly, I don't like my job. I think my job is kind of lousy. And then almost no matter where you are, if there's 2 or 3 people gathered, there in their midst is a bunch of office politics. And how do we understand that? So we're going to cover all these topics today. Now, if we want to do that, you have to understand the platform on which we stand when we're doing it, which is design thinking. I teach in the design program at Stanford University, where design thinking, originally called human-centered design, was invented way back in 1963. So a design way of thinking, which I would argue is intrinsically a Christian way of thinking, is the platform we stand on. So to make that clear, what do I mean? Here's a semester course in design in about 5 minutes. So there are different ways to think. How we think is something people have thought up. We have engineering thinking. What I would argue is the single most popular way of thinking on the planet in the developed world today, which is in engineering, we solve our way forward. We solve our way forward when working on tame problems. That's a technical term developed by urban planners at Berkeley back in the 70s. A tame problem is a well-bounded problem. It's a repeatable problem. It's a problem whose solution works in a variety of contexts. It translates from one place to another just fine, and it works predictably. So when you've got all the information and you know how strong steel is and you know how much a car weighs and you know how trusses work, you can engineer a bridge to cross that river, and wherever you build that bridge, it's going to work just fine. You can solve your way forward. The great thing about that is you're right. And boy, do we love to be right. And frankly, after the Industrial Revolution and after certainly the information revolution of the modern era, there is so much technology surrounding us so much of the time. Everybody starts with, well, wait a minute, what's the right answer? As though there was a right answer, a solution to every question, and there isn't. Now, business, the biggest country in the world is capitalism. Second biggest country in the world is soccer or football. So, those are the places people live. Now, business is a really big capitalism, whether you like it or not, is huge. And in that world, we optimize our way forward. You're never done and you're never right when you're in business, but you can get better. Your customer can love you more. Your supply chain can be more ecological. Your corporate culture can be more diverse. Your profitability can be more defensible. Your brand can be more rememberable. All kinds of things can get better and better, but you're never done. Now, you can even get better quantitatively if you go to the right business school and learn the right graphs and the right Excel spreadsheet things to use. So business people are always trying to make it better. They optimize constantly. Then we're going to go over to, once we get back on the right screen, we're going to go to research thinking. And research thinking, which I run into a lot in the university world, where I've been the last 22 years, we analyze our way forward. We think up new thoughts. That goes back to a process originally developed by Plato and Socrates. We're coming up with a hypothesis and a dependent and an independent variable and peer review and all this stuff about how do we rigorously create new knowledge, not the crazy opinion going on in the echo chamber of the internet, but real bona fide card-carrying knowledge. And the academy does that, research labs do that, governments do that. It's a way of thinking in the world. These three ways of thinking are incredibly powerful. They have built huge institutions and amazing advances of human civilization, much of which blesses God day in and day out. Most of this is really good stuff. God's going, yeah, that's fabulous. However, there's a whole class of problems. None of these works on very well at all. These are messy problems, what are called wicked problems, problems where you don't know what you're even looking for until you find it. And after you find it, that solution you come up with or that idea you come up with cannot be replicated other places and used in other contexts or on other people because it's totally unique to the situation. And there are things where you do not know how to start because you're usually planning this thing we've never seen before called the future. And there is no data on the future. You can't analyze it. You can't optimize it. You don't know where it is. So in design thinking, we build our way forward. We literally recognize we don't know what we're doing, but we have hope and optimism that there's a solution out there in front of us. And so we're going to find a way forward by building ideas iteratively until we get to something that works well enough to actually release it into the universe, and off we go. So that's where design comes from. And now exactly what does design actually do? Well, we describe it one of two ways. Actually, two ways. It's a process and a set of mindsets. The process, which lays out nice and clean and linearly, it's never executed this linearly, but it starts with empathy, or so it would appear to start with empathy. Actually, even before the empathy step, there is another step, which is in fact what we call step 0, which is the acceptance step. Before you even start empathizing with the situation and understanding it, you have to accept the way things currently are. Like, oh, this pandemic's killing me. Oh my God, Omicron and BA2. I just started a whole new protocol. I had 2 new PCR tests this week because BA2 is on the rage here in North America. I'm like, oh man, I don't want to play this game anymore. Sorry, thanks for sharing. It's just true. So you can't solve a problem you're not willing to have. You start with acceptance, which by the way, is a deeply Christian position. We worship the God who is, not the God of should. You know, God isn't running around in heaven doing fantastical thinking, kind of going, oh man, I wish Tommy wasn't going to Prague. I really want him to go to Budapest. That's not happening. God accepts the autonomy of persons. God lives in reality with us. And now there's always an invitation based on the reality in which we find ourselves. God is the God of the real. Not of the God of regret. As far as the east is from the west, so far as set you from your sin. I mean, I forget your sin. God is really committed to the present and the future. So if God's committed to that, so we might want to be too. That takes us then to an empathy, which is to deeply understand you can't love what you can't see. Thomas Merton described contemplation, the contemplative soul, as one that has a long and loving look at the real. You've never even seen the world until you can see it with God's eyes. And if you don't love it, you're not seeing the way God does, because God loves it. So if you're seeing something and you're reacting negatively, you can't find a way to love it. You haven't seen what God sees yet. So in design, we want you to see it like God. We want you to be deeply empathetic, completely understand the user, yourself, all the people who are participating, and then only will you define what you're actually working on. Most ministries don't fail for lack of intentionality. They fail for lack of a critical component. The thing missing in it is Jesus. Are you running with me, Jesus? Thinking up a Christian thing to do is incredibly easy. Finding a Christian thing to do where Christ is already moving and you're joining the Spirit, that's harder. That's how you define empathetically what is going on in the world where you're joining what God is moving into. Then we ideate, have lots of different ways we can go. We take those ideas into prototyping. We try things out a little bit, give it a little experiment, get some feedback, give the Holy Spirit an opportunity to give us some discernment input by showing up and doing some things in the real world. And then we test what we do before we actually, foist it onto other people. Now, the design mindsets are these. It starts, by the way, with curiosity. And curiosity really begins with this incredibly optimistic point of view that says, gosh, whatever's going on here, I bet it's interesting. Well, of course it is, because God loves it. And then what is that interest going to take me to do? It's going to take me out to radical collaboration. This really shows up in the empathy step. By radical collaboration, I don't mean collaborating with radicals or having a radical idea. I mean radically inclusive collaboration. Meaning go and talk to everyone, really hear what's going on around you. I did some work with the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation, a woman named Lisa Slayton back in the day. Tommy knows Lisa. They do great work in economic development. And they said that they adopted John Perkins of the Voice of Calvary's definition of justice, that justice is radically inclusive welcome. Everyone is welcome. Everyone participates. Everyone plays. That's the entry rule at the kingdom of God. So radical collaboration as a designer means we need to hear from everybody. And that's going to cause us to have a new point of view. We're going to be teachable. And we're going to reframe my problem in light of what I've heard. I've got to get going. I got to be mindful of process. I need to know when it's time to set my eyes on Jerusalem and get walking, and when it's time to hang around up in Capernaum and talk to these people. I need to know where I am in the process. I need to have a bias toward action. We do not think our way forward in design. We do our way forward. We are action-oriented people. It's called the Christian walk. It's not called the Christian notebook full of ideas. Quickly, let's go study all the passages in the New Testament where Jesus is leading a group of the apostles working on their updated statement of faith documentation. Oh, there are none. How about taking a walk and talking to people and feeding somebody and having dinner, and let's go out there. Let's go do stuff. So we're a do stuff outfit. And then we tell the story. That's called testimony. Be prepared at all times to give a testimony of the hope that lies within you. What's this hope? Hey, what are you working on that you're hopeful about, that you can share with me, that you're designing forward into seeing what the reality of the kingdom might look like in realization? So that's where design comes from, and with the closed captioning turned on, why it's incredibly compatible with a Christian orientation. Now, that's the backdrop on where this book came from, what the big ideas, what the big platform of design thinking is. And now it's time to get into, 4 big ideas about the book. I'm going to try to get all these in because Tommy said he wanted some more content, take a little announcement and talk about something else about C.S. Lewis right in the middle, and then we'll see how we're going to do. If time doesn't permit, I may have to cut one of these ideas out. I'll warn you in advance. We'll see how the clock goes. I've never done this particular presentation in this particular set before. So we'll see how we do. First of all, the first stress I talked about is people are really struggling because of the pandemic. I mean, there's a massive impact on their workplace. It affects different people very differently. You know, if you're an information technologist, you're probably fine. You're part of the digital diaspora. You're logging on from some other place. But if you're a frontline worker in a hotel or in the food service industry, I mean, you're in real trouble. So what's going on is people are in a lot of stress. Now, I already said that in design, the critical step to begin anything is acceptance, step 0. Now, it turns out acceptance is huge. It is the step 0 of design. It's also step 5 in the Kubler-Ross grief process. You know, anger, bargaining, you know, denial, depression, and finally acceptance. And then beyond acceptance, meaning making is what they call the 6th step. But that last step of going through a grief experience is accepting reality again in this now unwanted new reality. So I think it's kind of complementary that the end of grief is the beginning of design. And the whole, we've got a planetary grief going on. Like, what happened to the world we used to live in? You know, going on 2+ years ago. So one thing you got to do is help people really live in reality. Now, we have observed 3 different kinds of acceptance, and you want to pick carefully. There's oppressive acceptance, like, okay, here it comes again, you know, and I'm just the victim. I feel powerless. You know, I don't even feel like a human being. That's not very life-giving. There's suppressive acceptance, which is sort of heroic. I got it. Don't. I had it with Delta. I've got it. I'm in charge. We got this thing figured out. Don't worry. We're gonna be fine. We're gonna be fine. You know, and you puff up your chest and you stiffen your back and away you go. Now that may get you through the moment, but what you're doing is you're really denying the reality of these losses, and you're going to get crushed later. What goes around comes around. And then there's engaged acceptance, which is like, wow, here we go. This is really rough. Okay, what is happening, and what might our next steps be? So there's a way to engage the situation while fully accepting it. And the whole issue is, am I stepping into the new normal? Because this is the real transition to what we would call a reframe. This concept of the new normal, it's not that helpful, you know, because it doesn't address what we've observed people experiencing. And I think this recent global surge is actually going to bring this all back up again. So we're going to see this particular process. And the process looks like this, you know, so there's the world as I know it. And it's going along, and I think I understand how the world works, you know. And then in 2020, now, you know, almost 2 years ago, you know, we had this thing called the COVID wait. Oh, here comes COVID. When's it going to be over? And the language was, I just can't wait for this to be done. I can't wait to get back to things. You know, I really want things to start back up. All the language was around, let's go back. In 2021, I'm going to get to go back, aren't I? No, you're not. This isn't just a timeout in a waiting room. The pandemic is an example of a disruption. In fact, in the 2nd edition of our book, The Designing Your New Work Life, we invent a term called disruption design. And a disruption is any big change about which you find yourself saying, wow, things are never going to be the same again. So when you're on the other side of a disruption, and a disruption can be personal, could be regional, could be global. We've been through all of those. I mean, you know, 16 months ago, my wife died of cancer. That's a pretty personal disruption. You know, last year, you know, my hometown darn near burned to the ground. A couple of other folks got wiped out in the tsunami. That's a huge regional disruption. And of course, then COVID is a worldwide, you know, a large regional disruption in Ukraine. Hopefully that's not going to go global, but disruptions change things permanently. And when you're running into those things, it's a different kind of a change, and you need some different tools, because we're not going back there. We're not going back to the world of 2020 anymore. So what's really going on is there's an old world, you know, and it's leading then to a new world, and the new world hasn't arrived yet. I'm in that in-between place, and in that gap between the old and the new world, what am I supposed to do? Well, my partner Bill and I call that not the waiting room, because that means you looking backward and has you not being available, has you not accepting. And we're saying what you need to do is reframe that as the acceptance zone, the place where you're saying, I don't know what's coming, but I'm looking forward to it, not looking back to where I was. And this is where we are. Now, then we talk a lot about what do you do during the acceptance zone, but the key thing there is to be curious, like, okay, what is happening? What is changing? What can I learn about this new and interesting world, as painful as it may be? Pain isn't the point, it's just the price of getting across the gap and into the new world. And all I really want to be is deployed. All I want to be is of use to the Lord anyway. So I'm not in charge of the world. I'm just trying to serve it. Okay, so that's one of the big ideas is in disruption design, you got to get out of the old world. You got to keep waiting, stop waiting for this to go backward, and you got to move forward. Now, second big idea, that's the second one out of 4 now. This I'm going to do a quick romp through some of the highlights of this book, is money versus meaning. And a whole bunch of people who are pivoting into ministry ask that question. Am I going to go make some money, make a living, and support my family, or am I going to go, do a meaningful thing and work for the Lord and serve the kingdom? Which is it? And we set this up as a dichotomy, and we think that dichotomy is unnecessary and pretty painful. So there's a fall. Anytime your brain, by the way, sets up something as an either or, the work-life balance, the money-meaning balance, your brain turns it into a dichotomy, a zero-sum game. Meaning goes up, money goes down. Money goes up, meaning goes down. That's not the way it works. So don't set yourself up for these either ors. So we think that's a bad way to think about it. And so enlarge the question, what do you make? And what you make, well, I have to think about that. Even Einstein said not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So not all the number stuff is important, and there's some important stuff that doesn't have numbers on it. You need to include that in the equation. And very often we talk about money too much. So when you ask the question, what do you make? The average person is thinking salary. And we're saying is, well, that's true in the market economy, but there are other parts of the human endeavor. In the social economy, which most of you are probably participating in at some level, you have an impact. You talk about change management, that kind of stuff. And the creative economy, you're an artist, you're a filmmaker, you talk about making an expression in the world. And the truth is, everybody does all of these. We're all making some money, doing some things, participating at one level or another out there in the economy. We're all making an impact. We're all having an expression. And some things, impact more than one of these at the same time. And when you think about your abilities, your capacity as a human being, right where you are, what mix of these different kinds of skills that relate to what you can do in these different areas is how you mix what you're doing in the world. There's a soundboard, like when you're making a song, you raise the treble and you drop the bass and you add in the drums, you're changing the sound levels of the different aspects of what's going into the song to create the sound that you really are looking for. And the best sound is not everything on max or everything in the middle. It's a mix and it changes with time. So what we recommend is that people think about your maker mix, the mix of money-making things you're doing, impact-causing things you're doing, creative expression-causing things you're doing, and fiddle around with that. Because if one of the frustrations you're having relates to what you think of as a money versus meaning problem, what you're probably really thinking about is your maker mix. How am I spending my time? What am I doing? And you sometimes very small changes in what the mix looks like can have huge dividend rewards. So the example right here, after my wife retired, I lost her over a year ago. She pivoted from high technology into I don't know what. And she finally landed in working on homelessness. So she had a vibrant ministry in the homeless world for about 12, 15 years. She wasn't making any money at all. That's all up to me now. She's having a pretty significant impact on people's lives, but she wasn't doing much expression at all. And she felt a little used up. And then she thought, well, what do I really want? Do I need to go back and get a job? No, I don't think so. I think what I need is more creativity. So she started taking a watercolor painting class, 1 hour a week, 1 hour a week. And it was a huge impact. So she raised her expression knob a little bit. And in so doing, found herself having a very different experience of her life. Small time and physical changes can have huge psychic dividend impacts. Now, by the way, one thing I'm going to briefly stop and mention here is this has everything to do with the fact that, God didn't make monocolored, you can't just do one thing, people. You're all incredibly creative, complex expressions of the image of God. And part of what we're trying to do is help people recognize that. A lot of what we do in the work world, in the economy world, in the capitalistic world, and frankly, in the church world, is we end up creating boxes that feel really small and people feel like less than they are. So we want people to be fully human. Jesus is the second Adam. He's showing us his fullness of life. So this is a way to help people get fullness of life. you can have a better work life without getting a new job, just thinking differently about some of these kinds of things and giving yourself a chance. And in addition to not only how this affects you, many of you are a team leader, or you run some volunteers, or you're the executive director of the entire thing. You're the pastor of the church. You're running the ministry. You're raising the money. So you have people working with and for you. So there's two ways you can hear everything I'm doing today. One is, what does it mean to you? And the other is like, whoa, what am I learning here that affects how I impact the work life of the people who work with and for me? So if we knew everybody here was a manager, and the key thing we're working on is holistic corporate cultures and designing work worlds into which the workers' lives can be more life-giving, I would be giving you the same material with a little different angle on it. But I want you to be listening both as an individual, and for those of you to whom it applies, which I'll bet is many of you, as a manager, because that's also how you talk about this with your colleagues. All right. Now, there's actually a worksheet we're not going to do, but very briefly, if you wanted to actually do this thing, it's really simple. I'll just click this. You take a piece of paper, you make 3 bars, money, impact, and expression. You locate where you presently are. I mean, am I making as much money as I possibly can, or barely any at all? And it's just max versus min, up to you. There's no numbers here. It's just a personal exercise. Am I making as much impact as I could or not? Am I having as much expression as I could or not? And if I wanted to move something, what would I move? If I moved it just a little bit, what would that look like? So that's what the worksheet is. That's available to you after the fact. We're going to do a different worksheet later. And that different worksheet is going to come up looking at this idea. I'm going to introduce this idea, and then we're going to have a brief announcement about some other fun stuff you guys got coming your way before we do the next worksheet. Okay, so this again, I'm Simon Sinek, who's a culture leading author and so on, and he's talking about this thing called impact. Let's see what he has to say.
And so I keep meeting these wonderful, fantastic, idealistic, hardworking, smart kids. They've just graduated school. They're in their entry-level job. And I sit down with them and I go, how's it going? They go, I think I'm going to quit. I'm like, why? They're like, I'm not making an impact. I'm like, you've been here 8 months. It's as if they're standing at the foot of a mountain and they have this abstract concept called impact that they want to have in the world, which is the summit. What they don't see is the mountain.
Okay, so I'll stop right there. And the whole point is about having an impact. I'm pretty sure everybody on this call wants to have an impact, and that what impact you make really matters to you. And the impact being made by the people you collaborate with, the impact on the people you serve, all matters to you. And what it turns out is, in our work, we've heard an awful lot of feedback from people kind of going, gosh, just not sure I'm doing the right thing. I'm not sure I'm in the right place. It's kind of, I don't feel like I am where I should be. There's this kind of groany, ambiguous, struggle. And we kind of go, well, what's the problem? What is it? I don't know. It's just, And the more we try to uncover this thing, what we find them saying is that the nature of the impact that they're having by virtue of the role they own in the world is feeling like it's a misfit. And that one of the things we realize is everybody wants to have an impact, and nobody talks about what that means. I mean, maybe the theory of change in your NGO that's being sent in the proposal to the foundation for the grant money has a theory of change in it, and they talk about impact. But what does that mean to me as an individual? How do I think about impact? So what I've got here is a model for how to think about impact. And it's, again, very qualitative, but hopefully it allows you to have a better conversation with yourself and maybe the Holy Spirit. So what we're talking about is 2 things. We're talking about type of impact and place of impact. So type of impact, I'm talking about 3 different things. I could be sustaining and supporting what's already going on in the world. I'm not making a change. I'm keeping the world running. And that's like the middle zone on the x-axis, on the horizontal. Over on the left, I could be in renew, repair, remediate. So I'm fixing stuff that's broken. I'm redeeming stuff that's sick. I'm healing wounds. I'm getting rid of bad stuff. That's over on the left. In the middle, I'm keeping stuff going. I'm oiling the gears that run the world or run the ministry. I'm keeping, I'm shoveling the coal into the furnace to keep the train running down the track. I'm sustaining the process. Or over on the right, I'm doing this very different kind of thing, which is I'm putting this new thing in we've never seen before. I'm bringing this new exciting value add that has not been in the world before. And I'll give you examples of this. then that's the kind of impact. And it's really just sort of like, red on one side, green in the middle, blue on the other. It's not plus or minus, numbers. Then on the vertical axis, I'm looking at my point of impact. Is my point of impact at the individual level? Is it near? Am I talking with one person? Is it one-to-one? Is it global? I'm writing policy in a windowless office in the basement of the UN talking about wellness policy, or somewhere in between. I'm doing a small group with an institution. It's a church, that's an institutional group. I'm doing a national thing. I mean, Tommy's doing a national. This is an international ministry of leadership development for the Growth Center and for Resource Global. So where's my point of impact? Now you combine those two things, my point of impact and my type of impact, and you actually locate what the nature of the impact of your role is. This is not a person. I don't put Tommy here. I don't, or Josh. I put the role. So an example would be, let's say I'm a systems analyst in an investment bank. I'm working on healthcare, for Goldman Sachs. What am I doing? I'm keeping the wheels of capitalism running. I'm doing that at the institutional level for healthcare. I'm not changing anything, but boy, it's pretty important for those people to be able to go to the bank and keep their hospital running. Okay. Or I'm the Gates Foundation malaria person. I am trying to get rid of malaria across the entire region of this thing called Earth. I have a global remediation role. I'm a brain surgeon. I take tumors out of people's brains one at a time, one person at a time. I'm a homeless center chef. I feed people in a homeless center that services a little city, and hopefully I'm doing some combination of both solving their hunger and teaching them how to cook. I'm at Google and I'm in charge of autonomous cars. Well, that's not quite as global as malaria because asphalt doesn't go to every place in the world. Malaria does. And so we're doing a really new thing that's like a big part of the world. So the further up I go, the more scalable, or I'm Dave and Bill at Stanford teaching these design classes, or going out and do conferences like this as a thought leader, or, frankly, publishing books. And I got to explain why those are three different places. But anyway, most jobs have more than one role in it. And my job as a, presenter reformer is different than my job as an author, which is different than my job as a teacher. It's just a way to think about what you're doing in the world. So what I want to do now is break briefly. We're going to come back. We're going to do that impact map. I want you to think about your own experience. I'll tell you how to do that after we hear from C.S. Lewis. So KJ, you're on.
Okay, you're not hearing from C.S. Lewis. He's long gone, but
well,
I represent the
CS.
I'll make this quick because I don't want to break this flow that you've got going, Dave. I represent the C.S. Lewis Institute. We're just happy to be partnering with Resource Global. We're longtime friends of Resource Global and Tommy, and we just appreciate the work and the ministry that they bring together. If you're interested, look us up online, cslewisinstitute.org. We're a discipleship of heart and mind. We are trying to help people with impact, a lot of what you're kind of talking about here, Dave. So look us up. We're in 17 cities and we're international, and we're just excited to be a part of tonight. So I know that the Growth Center brought this to you for free, but if you can, I just want to put a plug in to support them so they continue to bring you great events like this. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome. Okay, we're just going to keep going. There's no.
Hey, Dave, I'm going to make one announcement too.
Sure,
I didn't even talk about our plan for questions at the beginning. So I put this in the chat, but everyone, we have a designated Q&A time at the end. So you can save questions for then, but if you want, put them in the chat and I'll make sure that we can get through those. We're going to tackle them together in the plan time at the end. So we want to get through as much as can, but also want to address things that are brewing in your mind. So
yeah, and again, we're drinking from a fire hose for about 70 minutes, and the reason being, with 4 or 5 major different topics, having done this a lot of times, there's plenty of cute questions available on any of these, and we could burn up all our time on just one. So once you've heard all the stuff, we'll take questions on anything at the end. So if you have a question as we go along, type it in the chat right now in real time, then you won't forget it. It's okay to type while I'm talking. I do it all the time. All right, so that being said, going back, let's jump in and actually try this thing I was just describing. Now, you were all sent this document by email. And if you don't have that, it's really easy to make one on a piece of paper with a pencil. So all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil, and you draw a big cross over on the side. And then we're going to take a couple of steps and do this together, and I'll just walk you through it. So the first thing I want you to do, just just make a couple of lines if you need to, over on the left side of that piece of paper, is to list 4 or 6 roles that you have had in the past, maybe 2 or 3 roles in the past, and 2 or 3 you might be contemplating, gosh, I'm thinking about getting a master's in public health and working in wellness. You know, I think, because, in order to bring, flourishing back to the world, okay, that's a role that you can put on your list. So if you've got some things you're hoping for in the future, as well as roles you've had in the past, by the way, I wouldn't put down role like Christian. Okay, that's not a role, or even, husband. I mean, that's like got 9 jobs in it. So be a little more specific. Your day job. Let's say you are a school teacher. You're a 6th grade school teacher. Okay, well, it says at least I'm a curriculum developer. I'm a teacher, and I'm a personal growth coach. Because I spend a lot of time with my kids one-on-one. So you might want to break jobs down into the key things you do. Tommy Lee is running a couple of ministries. What does that mean? His first job, he's a fundraiser. His second job is he's a fundraiser. His third job, he's a fundraiser. His fourth job, he's a program developer. So that's welcome to the ministry world. So you put down the key roles you've had. Just make a list. Do that now. I'm just going to walk you through it. We're going to do this in real time. We're going to put you into breakouts to discuss this right now. So don't be going off and making a snack, or you're going to look really foolish in the breakout. You actually want to do this worksheet. Okay. So write down a list of roles. And then locate those roles on the map. So if I'm a curriculum developer, I'm writing new curriculum on how to learn math tables, in grammar school. What am I doing? I'm developing new material. That's on the new side of things. And I'm working with a small group. So, be, a little ways up and about halfway up from the bottom and partway over toward the right, because it's a new thing for a group. So locate on that map. By the way, this is according to you. There's no right answer. I've had surgeons describe their jobs 3 or 4 different ways that would be very differently located. And one brain surgeon said, I'm all about getting rid of tumors. He's a remediator. And another brain surgeon told me, oh no, I'm all about technique. I'm all about developing new technique. I'm a technique developer. Oh, okay. So I think of myself, the way I think about my impact in the world is I'm changing the way people do brain surgery. Another person thinks I'm changing lives by taking tumors out of brains. They both do the same thing. But the way they hold what that role means, the impact of that role means to them, is a very different story. And that story determines where the roles you just listed on that list go on the map. Okay? So I'm going to give you a little time to take each one of the roles you listed and put a dot somewhere on that map as best you can related to that role. Don't overthink it. Now, once you've got that map populated, and first of all, there is no sweet spot. No, there's one place God wants you all the time. No, these are roles. We all have lots of different roles in life. When I do this with older people, they've got 15 dots on here, and they're all over the place. There might be a pathway. There might be a change. Like, hey, for some reason, the lower left is empty. I don't know what that tells me. But after you've got that map populated with the roles you have had and some you're contemplating, then ask the question, what are you noticing? Does that map give you any question or any insight? Now, the answer, there may not be any insight or question, like, oh, if this makes sense to me, I'm good to go. That's fine. But what you want to do is you want to become more articulate about what is going on between you and the world of impact and what it means to you. And particularly, I'm thinking for people in ministry, we care deeply about the impact we're having. And one of the ways to be able to be satisfied in how that impact is going is understanding precisely what it is you're doing and how you think about it. So I'm trying to bring a higher level of articulation. You can't be grateful unless you know what you're doing. So jot down whatever observations or questions or insights come to you as you look at your map. The other thing to keep in mind, I think it's less a problem with this group, hopefully, is there is no place on this map that I'm telling you is good or better than any other. Way up and to the right and way down and to the left aren't better, they're just different. You know, the Google car guy is not better than the brain surgeon woman, you know, and the malaria person's not better than the banking person. They're just doing very different kinds of things for different constituencies of people. We need all these people. We need one-on-one people. We need one to millions people. We need fixers. We need runners. We need remediators. We need all these people. They're all on the team, but it feels different. It feels different playing pitcher than it does playing first base. So after you've hopefully got a list, a map, and a couple of thoughts down, what we want you to do now is have a conversation. So I'm going to ask Tricia to hit the magic button and send you all off into groups of 3. And if the numbers are off, some of you might be in a twosome or a foursome, depending what Zoom wants to do to you. And I'm going to, let's make this 10 minutes, Tricia. So what will happen is she'll set the timing. You're going to get a little window that's going to pop up and say, you know, go to breakout room number 23, accept that invitation, click on it. It'll put you into that room. And then after a little while, you'll see a notice that says it's time to come back. Don't even hit another button. The system will automatically bring you back into the plenary session in about 10 minutes. So take all the time you can. And during that 10 minutes, each person briefly share, you know, what came up for you in doing this exercise, what are your insights, and converse with one another about how do you think about impact and how is this working for you? Okay, that's the conversation. Off you go. All right, hang on to those thoughts. I'm going to do, I'm actually going to do one more, the third of fourth modules. And then I'm actually going to stop and do Q&A. I want to make sure I have plenty of time for Q&A. If that takes the rest of our time, that's fine. We'll do a little video bonus of the fourth idea. If it turns out the questions aren't that intense, we'll come back and do the fourth thing later. I want to make sure we get your questions covered because it's really about you. It's not about me and the slides, as wonderful as my slides are. Okay, so that's it for the impact thing. Now, third idea is, in fact, in our more recent book, this is the big idea. So the big idea in the first book is there's more aliveness in each of us than one lifetime permits us to live out. That's the way God made you, by the way. And so there's more than one of you in there, right? You know, by the time each of us die, we are a long way from having fully rendered into the world the revelation of all the possibilities of generativity that God could have imagined with the thing called you. You know, I mean, you know, we hadn't heard everything Jesus had to say. He got the job's done. I'm not, you know, that's true of all of us. So that's the big idea in the first book. And the Odyssey Plan exercise is the one that invents 3 different versions of your next 5 years, is the central exercise around that. In the second book, the big idea is, where do I get a better job? I got a lousy job. Oh, I know where I can get it. I can get it from me. Most people tend to think I have to go get a better job from somebody else. Most people, by the way, don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. 25% of American workers would forego their next raise if you fired their boss instead. I'll pay you to fire my boss. That's 1 in 4 people. And so what Bill and I are saying is, you have a lot more autonomy than you think. And the best place to get a better job is from yourself. So don't resign, redesign. Now, right now, this is very relevant because the big quit or the great resignation, which is definitely rolled across North America, it's definitely rolled across Europe. And I just did an international session and it's starting to roll down in through Asia, where over 25 million people have quit their jobs. You know, so people are frustrated, you know, and a lot of them are quitting with nothing in hand. They're just like, I've had it. There's got to be a better thing on the other side. And so I think we're a little worried. A lot of those people who are quitting are jumping out of the pan into the fire. You know, the next job may not be better. So before you jump, we're not saying, you know, you could take a look at another way of doing this. And what I'm really doing here is I'm giving people ideas for finding more aliveness, finding more gratefulness to be discovered right where you are. So in the book, we talk about 4 strategies for don't resign, redesign, redesigning in place. And the first one is reframe and re-enlist. And this is the simplest, and in some ways can be the most powerful. And a reframe and a reenlistment means you don't change anything except your story. You got the same job, you got the same role, you got the same boss, you got this, but maybe some other things are going on, and it's time for you to update your story and the way you think about it, because at the end of the day, I go, hey, was that a good day? Well, according to whom? So literally in 2016, I got an invitation to go be the first entrepreneur in residence at the Center for Faith and Work, a Redeemer Church, Tim Keller's Redeemer Church in New York City. I shared that with my atheist partner, Bill Burnett, and he goes, that's exactly who you are. You should totally go do that. I go, Bill, we can't afford for me to do that. Who's going to do all the teaching? He goes, no, it's a great idea. We need to do succession planning. If you leave, it's going to put a huge stress on the team, and the younger people are going to step up, and they're going to have to do the job and get in the front of the room and teach. They're all scared to teach in front of you because you're a good teacher. So this is going to be great. You go to New York, have a great time. So I go to New York, have a great time. I come back and go, hey, I'm ready to go back in the classroom. Bill goes, oh, there's no way you're going to get in the classroom. Are you kidding? We've got the staff now stepping up. If you come in again, they're all going to back off. No way. I'm not letting you teach students anymore at all. You can't teach students. You can only teach teachers. I went, what? You can't do that to me. I started this thing. And he goes, sure, I can. Watch me. I was really mad. But nonetheless, suddenly, I've got the same lab. I built this thing, got the same lab, the same curriculum, the same place, but I've got a whole new relationship with it. And I got to come up with a new idea. I mean, it used to take me 45 minutes to walk across the center of the Stanford campus because so many students would run up and grab me and ask me a question or give me a big hug or what have you. It was great. I knew hundreds of students really well. I can walk straight across that plaza now in about a minute and a half. Nobody stops me because I don't teach students anymore. After 4 years, all the kids who knew me have graduated and they're gone. Like, who's that old white guy? So I now have a completely different relationship with totally different people. I have a wholly new story. I got to reframe what this is. I'm now helping other people do things. I spend more time on campuses outside Stanford than at Stanford. I'm working with the Gap Year for Grown-ups program with people in their 50s and 60s. So I'm thinking in a totally different way, and I have to re-enlist my motivation around a different way of thinking about it. Now, that didn't involve getting a new job. It involved thinking a new way. It's time to have a new wineskin in your head. Second way you can redesign your job is to remodel it. You can remodel it one of two ways, cosmetically or structurally. You can just, put up some flowers, move the furniture around, change the paint a little bit. I mean that all metaphorically. Or you can even make a little bit of structural change in your responsibilities. Now let's see how much this is going to go to. So an example, and this is particularly effective in the ministry world, is when you want to cosmetically redesign your job, you move from thinking about what you're doing to thinking about how you do it. Now, my example is a business example, pardon that. But let's say so there's a little graph over there on the left. That thing says days sales outstanding. There are probably not a lot of people on this call who spend a lot of time thinking about DSO, days sales. But this is an economic measurement of the profitability health of a company. You're selling stuff. You measure days sales outstanding. And you curve this. So you're in the accounting department and you make these curves, and you're a quantitative person, and that's what you do. If you work in the development organization of your foundation or your nonprofit, you probably look at, curves of some kind. And you think to yourself, man, I really wanted to spend more time working with people. I want to talk about ideas, not numbers. I need a new job. I need to go work in the human resource department. I need to work in the recruiting department where I get to talk to people all day long. No. That's going to be a really big jump. You can think about the way you do it. And this is particularly true in ministry as well. There are lots of roles in ministry that include a lot of grunt work and a lot of difficulty. Like, oh man, I don't have to, make up all the handouts for the kids every week in Sunday school. Okay. I remember a young woman saying to me, nobody tells you when you're 20 that changing the world means grinding through a couple hundred emails every week. Nobody tells you that. So what you do is you focus on not changing your assignment, but changing how you do it. So let's say, you're the guy you're the woman putting together these curves. Well, what are these curves for? They're for people in other departments in your organization to know what's going on. You can go to those people. You don't have to ask permission. Like, hey, everybody that receives this report that I publish, do you understand it? How do you use it? Tell me what you're doing over here in the marketing department. Tell me what you're doing over here in the missions board, and what information you guys deal with. And do you know what this might mean to you? And by the way, now that I've explained it to you, do your people get that? And if they don't get that, would you like me to come by and do a lunch and learn over a brown bag lunch someday, next Tuesday, maybe? Everybody brings a brown bag and I'll explain this. Now, suddenly you're holding seminars on information management. You're talking to other people. You're coaching people on how to use this information. No one's going to mind that the information they're paying you to develop is being well received. That's okay, making your job better. And what did you do? You thought up a way in place to spend more time talking to people. You didn't have to have a job in HR to talk to people. You have to find a way to get more people into what you're already doing. And there's lots of ways to do this kind of thing from, frankly, any job. And there's lots of examples in the book. So think about how, not just what. Early career people almost always seem to think that in order to get something, it's got to be right on the center of my business card. Am I being paid to? I want to be paid to preach the word. Okay, well, you're actually mostly a playground monitor in Sunday school on the weekend. So you're not, can we find ways for you to bring the word into what you're doing? So you have to get clever about your how. Now, the next two ideas for how to redesign your job get a little tougher. So one is very easy, you just think differently. Number two is quite easy, probably doesn't take your boss's permission to go come up with cleverer ways to do things that are more life-giving to you, that more reflect the gifts God's given you. And then 3 and 4 is relocate and reinvent. I make sure you pick up and move over and do a different kind of a job. I'm going to move out of the youth ministry area and I'm going to move into, fundraising. I'm going to move out of fundraising and into small group leadership. I'm going to move whatever it might be. I'm going to relocate or reinvent. I can be a totally different kind of a person. And the reinvent is the hardest one. I may have to even go get some more training, but I'm still working in the same institution, the same organization I was before. Why? Because they know me and they trust me. Well, man, we've never had, Trisha cook before. She was never the house, concierge before, but, she was pretty trustworthy before. Let's give her a shot, So you work with the people who trust you. Now, there's a 4-step process which we developed between books 1 and book 2, which is really a summary of the whole life design methodology. And frankly, it's an enactment of discernment. I teach that differently in another context. If that 4-step process is the one you use in both cases, and it's really very, very simple. It's get curious, talk to people, try stuff, and tell your story. Get curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story. If you want somebody even trying to discern what might be a change they want to make, these are the steps to take. And so you do that as a virtuous cycle. You start with getting curious. What do you think you might want to do, or the Lord is leading you to do? Now go and talk to people who are doing that kind of work. Like, hey, people in the fundraising group. Hey, people in the curriculum development group. Hey, people who are teaching small children. Not would you hire me, or what would you pay, or what does it take to get a job here? That's a transactional conversation. What you want to have is like, hey, what's it like to be you? What did you do before this? What's a good day like for you? Why do you enjoy this? And that's getting the story, getting the narrative of the other person. Now, if you're a Christian, you're a communitarian. You believe that you're a member of the body of Christ. And we just celebrated Easter. Christ is risen, and yet Christ is still incarnate. Why? Because God still has skin on. It's called the body of Christ, and we're all in it. So we are part. In fact, the Bible declares not, we've noticed operationally that collaboration is fairly effective. So we recommend that you guys hang out with each other because you'll probably get more done together than you would by yourself. Bible doesn't say that. Bible says you are members one of another. The hand may not say to the foot, I have no need of you. You are interdependent. You may not even realize it, but that's literally who you are. And by the way, the latest science in neurophysiology agrees. Consciousness is not just a byproduct of the brain electrical activity. Would even say Dan Siegel, a secular, attachment theorist from UCLA Medical School, he would say consciousness exists in your brain, in your body, and in the relational interactivity between us. The separate self is a toxic lie. That's a UCLA Medical School professor. The Bible's known it for a long time. Science is finally catching up. So when you talk to people, you're actually engaging with another person and finding out what that life is like. Dan Gilbert at Harvard calls this surrogation versus simulation. getting a bunch of information and thinking about what you might want to do is simulating it. I'm going to imagine what it's like to be Tommy Lee. Or I could go talk to Tommy Lee, and I'm experiencing what it's like to be him, do that kind of ministry work that he does by surrogating through his conversation. So this is a deeply profound way to engage the human experience. It's a discernment opportunity to find out whether or not this is the kind of life God might be moving you toward. Now, after you talk to these people, you might get some invitations to go try stuff, ride along, participate in the class, give it a try. So do stuff where, again, here's a bag, here's a staff, there's a town, go talk to somebody. I mean, when Jesus sends people out in pairs, they are so not ready. I mean, so do we believe in bad training? No, we believe in behavioral methodology, the lived experience. You're supposed to grow into your future self, not think into your future self. So talk to people, be a member of the community, try stuff, go out and do things. And then as you're doing that, tell your story. Share what you're growing with and see who else can help you along the way. You iterate that process. And if you iterate that process, eventually what you're doing is getting more engaged or getting clearer on your call. And in so doing, you're designing your work and your life. Okay, so that's the big idea. And then number 4 is talking about politics. It turns out by politics, what I mean is the wielding of influence. There are 2 primary forces in organizational life: authority and influence. When you're in authority, you're in charge, and when you're trying to be influential, you're not. And so understanding the distinction between authority and influence and how to be an effective influence manager, how to impact decision-making and impact change-making when you're not authoritative is a really, really crucial thing. This is exactly what being as innocent as doves and as shrewd as serpents means. So that's an important thing to understand, but we're going to run out of time, so I want to stop right here. And if we get time, we'll come back to it. If not, I'll record a little video for you for free. And now let's jump right to this thing called What's on Your Mind. So hopefully I've already given you something to ask a question about. So Trish, have we got any questions? And if you haven't written a question, but you've got one, in the lower right where it says reactions, raise your hand and it'll pop you up to the top of the screen and we might call on you.
Perfect. We have a great question from Lori
Okay.
Kim in the chat. Lori, are you on? You want to restate? It's about motivation, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. You there, Lori? Yeah.
Yes.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Evans. That was amazing. So I was just curious, thinking about our students, how they have that immediate gratification going and they have the 6-second goldfish attention span, right? How do we fan the fire of intrinsic motivation, since we know that motivation life is intrinsic, not extrinsic, right? And to, for our students to have the required effort put into it, as research shows, intelligence without effort is wasted, right? And
Right.
also as we think about how do we help them to become their whole self, right? Even at school, and bring faith to school, like how we are trying to bring faith to marketplace. How do we, inspire our students to have that intrinsic motivation?
So here's my thought on that, and it may not be popular. But this is an opportunity to get in a certain kind of a trouble that I call being dead right. I was in a conversation with a room full of people of the Vice Provost Office of Undergraduate Education at Stanford, a group that is one of our primary funders. These are people who send me money. So I want to keep them happy. And we were talking about these kinds of things and teaching students, in particular this organization who's watching over, our 6,000 undergrads, wants to be sure that people are becoming more reflective. We want people getting liberal. This is a secular institution, but even they care about your soul. We want you to be liberally educated people who are going to be reflective. Reflect on your life, reflect on your values, reflect on being a thoughtful, coherent person in the world. That's who we want to send out from the campus. And they said, are you doing that? We said, well, yeah, we got a bunch of reflection exercises and stuff in there. It's part of our decision-making model. They go, what do you mean? You go, well, one thing we know that students want to do is they want to feel really good about the big decisions they're making about what they do with their career, what they do with their studies, and so on. There's a lot of pain around, am I doing the right thing? And so we found a way to connect into personal reflection, how that leads to better discernment and better decision-making. And so that's moving them along. And then the woman who was really interested in this says, that's not good enough. I kind of go, well, what do you want? She goes, they need to understand reflection is good intrinsically. They need to understand it's a fundamental value as a human person. You're doing that instrumentally. You're giving them a reason that something else they want, feeling good about a decision, is why they should reflect. We want them to know that reflection is something they should do anyway. And my response was, good luck with that. So what I would suggest, and what we do all the time when we're working on that extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation thing, is we try to get as clever as we possibly can to find something that somebody already wants, and then connect the thing they're not necessarily interested in to that in a way that they believe. If Jesus says, the physician cannot heal the well, can he? I've come to save sinners. If Jesus can't talk somebody into something they don't want to do, chances are I'm not gonna. So in that extrinsic, intrinsic thing, I mean, you might be right. That woman who was talking to me, she's right. That's great. But I believe in free will, and I think God gave it to us. So when you're struggling with that stuff, and this varies by age that you're talking about quite a bit, the challenge is, can I find something that my student cares about that connects to the thing that they don't quite yet care about, and see if I can't drag it along. And then after that's turned into something of value and some exercise, maybe I can flip it. But I have yet to be able to sell somebody something they don't want to buy. And being right and louder doesn't help. So you got to get clever. Josh, what's on your mind?
I'm thinking about the tell your story part of this virtuous cycle.
Yep.
And I'm so used to telling the story of the end user. Like, we have this new reframed perspective of this human that can help us understand the challenge differently. And I'm thinking about how to flip this and tell my story. And so I'm wondering if you have a specific example from this of what it looks like to tell the story. Does a specific example that's memorable to you come to mind?
Well, sure. I mean, it comes up all and the story I'm talking about telling is not an outcome story. It's in that virtuous cycle. You know, I'm trying to move along and I'm thinking about making a change. I'm thinking about redesigning my life. I'm thinking about screwing around in my work world. So I've got some curiosities I'm trying to lean into. And I'm talking to people about that. I'm having, hopefully generative conversations. I'm maybe even trying some things out. And along the way, I'm both learning things and I've got new questions arising. And so the current state of learning and the current state of inquiry, that's the essence of the story that I'm telling. So for instance, I mentioned, my wife made the really bad decision to get cancer again 2 years ago, and it killed her in December of 2020. So in the late 20 through 2021 was the year of processing that for me, a very heavy grief year, and people say, well, how's it going? I kind of go, well, it's really interesting. And what's that? Well, I'm learning all kinds of things about my marriage I didn't know, because they're coming to light in the light of what I'm, learning through this grief process. I'm in the final stage of my marriage, and I'm learning, about things I was not conscious of at the time, tell me, what do you mean? Well, it turns out, even the stuff that my wife had nothing to do with, like riding my motorcycle, didn't feel the same. She was never on that motorcycle. What's going on with that? And I began to realize, oh, there was this deep consciousness connection. We had a very intimate marriage. We were deeply connected, and that connection was with me all the time. There's something going on in this us that was bigger than I fully realized. I think she actually knew more about it than I did. And then I went, so I'm really trying to figure more about it. So what's your marriage like? So that's me telling the story. People are going to go, oh, and they either run away really quickly, like, that's too much, or they kind of go, wow, tell me more. So, and I just led a seminar for 250 alumni at Stanford on that theme, by the way. And people are like, people are kind of like, oh, so the tell your story part is actually, it's really, I could argue it's a variation on be prepared at all times to give a testimony of the hope that lies within you. Which most evangelicals go, oh, just have a 4 spiritual laws book handy at all times. No, it's like the hope that, I notice something's going on in the testimony of the hope that lies within you means you're asked to give testimony. Testimony is requested information, not volunteer. Like, I have something you need to hear. That's not testimony. Testimony is like, hey, I think you're interesting. Talk to me. So I think you're interesting because of what it is you're saying. There's something hopeful, there's something life-giving, there's something interesting, hey, what is it? What's going on with you, Josh? I want to hear more about that. That's the question you're looking for. And if you're living life in a meaningful way, and in an interesting, curious, teachable, humble, grateful way, the chance of you being interesting goes way up.
Thanks for sharing that, Dave.
Okay, what else? Trish, you got
other questions? Yeah. Some questions around the redesign versus resign. You mentioned the number one reason people leave due to their manager.
Yep.
With that in place, how could they redesign versus resign?
There's actually an example in this in the book. So one of the first things to do, this goes back to radical acceptance, right? We actually do an illustration, on feedback. We have an illustration in the book that talks about, what's my problem? My problem is, oh man, my boss is such a jerk. I never get any feedback around here. It's never going to happen. So the person who's saying that is saying, I want constructive feedback. I want to hear how I'm doing. I want encouragement, and my boss doesn't give me any feedback. He's just a jerk. And so we say, look, there's a reframe. The acceptance is, okay, first of all, is he really a jerk or he's just bad at feedback? Okay, that's a specific skill. May not be what he was trained and hired to do. So if you neutralize the acceptance of, I notice my boss never gives any feedback, and then I'm complaining to my coworker, and the coworker, and he says, I don't know what your problem is. He goes, what do you mean? He says, I get all the feedback I want. Are you kidding? John gives you feedback. He says, oh yeah. He never shares anything with me. He kind of goes, oh no, he doesn't share anything with me. I ask for it. What do you mean? I tell him exactly what information I'm looking for and what I think he ought to be rooting it in. And I tell him, I'll come back I said, here's what I want to know about what I'm doing. Here's the information I think you could evaluate. Can you give me 5 minutes on this tomorrow? And he's fine. He does a great job. It's just not organic and it's not natural. You got to ask for it. Oh, I had no idea. So part of that is you accept reality, then at least you're free to be able to make the move you can. Now, let's say it turns out, no, he's a zero feedback person. Okay, great. Are there other places I can get feedback in this organization? I don't need to stand at the door of my boss going bang, 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 and getting nothing for years. Like, I love this. Surprise should be a one-time thing. Next Friday, everybody's, at the water cooler at the end of the week, kind of going, hey, you know what John didn't do again this week? He didn't give me any feedback. Wow. Can you believe that? Sure. You said it the last 75 Fridays. So first of all, once you got something figured out, move on. So acceptance frees you to go do something you can do. Some people are happier not getting what they want than getting what they could have. Let me say that again. Some people are happier not getting their first choice than getting their second or third choice, which is right in front of them. It's about what you want. So the boss thing, are there bad bosses? Sure. Most bosses are mortal. Most bosses are fair at best. There's a lot of workarounds you can do. If you've got a wretched boss, an abusive boss, that's a whole nother story, then sure, get out of there. But for the most part, you're not going to change your boss. So optimize what you can get and then fill in the blanks from other resources. Okay, let's do one more.
Yeah, we have one more. If you have to drop off, I know we're at time. That's okay. And thank you. But if you can take one more, Dave, we'll do it.
Go ahead.
Bonnie's got her hand up here. I see you pop to the top and she typed it in. So
okay, Bonnie, what you got?
Hi, thank you so much. I've been a huge fan. Have your course already. So in light of previous work experiences throughout my life, most of them actually focused on roles with the new and global plus group matter. So the new is very consistent, very like apostolic, if you want to say it like that, and very global macro and direct services group matters.
Okay.
So that also with the two new roles I'm very interested in. And one is impact fund managing. So social impact fund managing, which that includes the macro, global plus new, and then operating an incubator or social incubator, impact incubator, which includes the group near direct plus new. So now that I'm straddling between these two types of opportunities and doing more research on them, I feel like there is a way to merge the two because naturally there is a flow. However, is there any blind spot that I'm not seeing, considering that I'm not in those roles, that I'm going to overextend in some way?
Oh, no. No, I don't think there's a lot of warning, hidden in that impact map idea. It's more like, what do I notice about myself? Well, when I contemplate working at the group level versus working at the global level, does that feel different? Now, if the group is big enough, they're both still going to be pretty virtual. I may not be directly working with the people,
Right.
so at one point, when does it actually become relational or communal? Am I working with a group? I work with a Praxis organization, which is also an incubator and accelerator. I have 24 business accelerator participants and 24 nonprofit CEOs per year. I get to know those people a little bit.
Right.
So that's a group, and that group services wide markets. I mean, thousands of employees and hopefully hundreds of thousands, if not millions of end users in various businesses. But, I can see a dozen faces that I recognize. So I think the big shift is when it gets personal. And above a certain size, it's just bigger and smaller virtuosity. And so for you, I think the idea would be, when are different skills kicking in? When are different communication things kicking in? When does it get more personal? And what do you notice about what's working for you, where your skills feel, either stressed or unstressed? That's where the qualitative shift would be. But I mean, you clearly live in a largely scalable environment. It's about scalability.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay. I think, well, we may not be done, but we're over.
We
Okay.
are at time. Well, thank you so much, Dave, and
Okay.
everyone for joining. It was wonderful to hear from you and to see everyone.
Thank you.
And have a great night.
Good to be with you all. Take care.
See you later.